Hi everybody, it's Lisa. Thanks for joining me today and welcome to my sewing lair. Today I am going to share with you a little thought process that I had. I'm trying to make my lair less lair-like. That's hard to say. And in doing so, I've been kind of going through my boxes and stuff, and I came across some leftover fabric that I had, which at the time, it must have just been these 1.5-inch strips is all I could get out of it. So I elected to make these 4 patches, and I basically just put them in a plastic bag and did not have any further contact with them other than going through and decluttering a little bit. And as I thought about what I was going to do with these, I thought I would make a 16 patch and use it as the center of a star block. And I have a deep love of star blocks. You know that I love Lemoyne stars, and the other thing that I like are Ohio stars and also Sawtooth stars. And the neat thing about a sawtooth star is that you can do a star and a star and a star and a star if you wanted to. But for this particular purpose, I thought I would simply do a 16 patch. That would be my middle, because I have fabrics that also have both peach and pink in it. I just decided to make my star points this peach fabric, which I bought on sale, and it's beautiful. It's really kind of like a linen-like. I think it's Staff of Japan, but I could be wrong on that. But anyway, it's been sitting around, and what I thought I would do is put it to good use. Now, I want to talk briefly about this Sawtooth Star and why it has a lot of neat things about it. Neat thing number one is that it is on a grid system, which is a simple square system, and it's squared like on a 16 patch. So what this allows you to do is to think about this block in rows, and then you can do modifications based on the units. The smallest unit is basically a half square triangle at 2.5-inch finished. So these are all 2.5-inch finished blocks. I never choose a half square triangle when I can do a flying goose unit because I don't like extra seams. And if you're doing complex seaming in the middle of this block, then you're going to appreciate having one less seam in your flying geese unit, because you still have to contend with this point here. Now, another aspect of this block in the symmetry is that the center unit, this is always 1/2 the size of the whole block. And why is that? Well, very simply, these 2 rows equal that. These 2 rows equal this. So, and then it's a square, so you have the same on the other side. So think about this block, if you will, as something that you can conscript into service for a scrappy center. And I do have a confession. I do not like scrap quilts. I don't like dealing with scrap. I avoid scrap at all costs. I don't like having bonus HSTs because that just means I have to find something to do with them. My preference for scrap is to, the smallest thing I will basically work with is 1.5 inches. That's what these blocks are. They are 1.5-inch strips. And I figure anything less than 1.5 inches is just really not worth futzing about with. Although, on second confession, I still have those scraps. I just haven't done anything with them. So that's not to say that I won't. I have, piece stupid things together just to get a shopping bag, and I'm not embarrassed by that because it has high utility, and I really don't care what it looks like. And also, it's a great way to practice your free motion quilting. But frankly, it takes a lot of time to sew those little itty bitty pieces. And when you think about scrap quilting and you're sewing itty bitty pieces versus larger pieces like this, you're still sewing the same seam and you're getting a lot more real estate than doing itty bitty pieces. Now, when I do these types of blocks, I do the strip piecing. So I'm working with, 1.5 inch strips and then sewing them together and subcutting them, of course, using my stripology ruler if it's on either the full or the 1/2 inch. So that's what I like, and so far I have 2 blocks, and I think they look super cute. And I'm not sure what setting they'll be in. I'm just trying to figure out how many more to that I can get out of what I have or what I can cobble together to make a little girl's quilt. That's certainly what this will be. But I also thought it would be a nice opportunity to make this block with you. Plenty of people make this block and will probably do it better than I will, but I'll show you the mere mortal way, and I'll open the kimono and show you the warts and all if I have problems. The other thing that's nice about this block, and most particularly using Flying Geese, is I use the 4 at a time, no waste method. I think that's the most efficient method to make Flying Geese, and you will have 100% success rate. And I thought we would make those together. I use Deb Tucker's wing clipper ruler. This one is for on the 1.5 inch. She makes another one if you need to go into 1/4 inches. And that brings up something interesting to share with you on rulers. When you have specialty rulers, they may not always have the markings that you need or want to make the cuts that you like. So just keep that in mind. If you were making Flying Geese and you needed to make them on the 1/4 inch trim, so it's either be on a 1/4 or a 0.75, you're not going to be happy with this ruler because there's no guidelines for you. And that's why the merit of these rulers is that it has guidelines for the sizes that you need. Alternatively, you could use something like this simple folded corners ruler. It doesn't have the exact same guidelines, but it will get you there. And I like this ruler quite a bit. And this has markings on the 1/4, and then over here it's got dots where the 8 is. Now you might ask yourself, well, why wouldn't these rulers have more markings on them? Well, I'll tell you why. The beauty of these rulers, particularly if you're making lots of units, is fewer lines means fewer distractions and fewer opportunities for you to make a mistake and line up something. So you're spending a lot less time trying to visually align, and I'll point that out when we make our unit together. So that's why it's important for you to understand what size you're going to make. Now, I understand when you're a new quilter, I absolutely had no idea. And as a new quilter, I have rulers I bought that I thought that I needed, and they just aren't, I don't need them, or I don't like the markings on them. Or they don't have useful markings, either the style of them or the gradations of them. So take some time to think about, what your use is. I highly recommend the wing clipper. In fact, I highly recommend any type of tool and Deb makes the best, or those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. Maybe I know that Creative Grids have other tools, but once you get into a method of making them, it's kind of that branding thing. If you only eat, Kellogg's cereal, then you're familiar with Kellogg's cereal, and that is what you'll buy. So I'm familiar with Deb Tucker's techniques, which are to slightly oversize and then trim down using very clear guidelines to do that. And she has these rulers for all blocks, or most blocks, that have high bias in it. Bias meaning high degree of bias on diagonal or angular cut fabric, because those are the things that you mess up on. If you try to do a flying geese unit and try to do everything perfectly, you really have to be perfect. If your sewing line's not straight, or your pressing line's not straight, anything that you do on a diagonal is compounded in error. And you'll notice that when you're kind of futzing around with your ruler, all it takes is a very small nudge, and then all of a sudden things are perfectly aligned. And if you had to do a big nudge, like if you nudge something on your sewing machine or cutting or marking, you're just not going to end up with the results that you need. Rulers such as this that give you a little bit of oversizing and a little bit of square up room really do help make the block more forgiving. And when we undertake this block, I'm going to show you some production tips for you to get tons of these done quickly and minimize the amount of rotation and strain that you put on your hands and wrists. So let's go ahead and now that I've extolled the virtues of the wing clipper, what I'm going to do here, I have my 4 patches and I'm basically going to sew them together. Remember, I have to have a 5-inch center, and because there's so many seams here, I typically sew with a scant 1/4 inch. And I did a test block with these that I made, and that's exactly what I needed. So that's what I'm going to do. Blocks like this that are really small, I do not glue base these, believe it or not. But when I'm at my sewing machine, I am using a stiletto. In this particular case, it's an AccuQuilt, which I love this tool. It's so perfectly balanced. But, you can basically serve the same thing as a pen by stabilizing an edge and feeding it through. So I don't always glue base, but I always secure my block. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these, and then we'll come back and see how I did. We'll take a look and see how I did. I'm going to go ahead and show you how I pop my seam. I'm taking and we're popping it. So we're getting a little 4 patch there. Can you see that? And then we're going to press it flat, and then press it from the front. Now, this needs to measure 5.5 inches. So let's put the ruler on it. And I'm just a little over 5.5 inches. So I'll trim this buck. I sewed with a scant 1/4 inch. And we're just talking about threads worth. So here again, just pop your seam that comes right open. And it really helps these lay flat. And you want to make sure the front is flat too. And frankly, anytime you have raised items here, I think it makes sense to use a pressing sheet. I like to use a pressing sheet because nothing moves underneath, and it protects your fabric from your iron if you have any kind of gunky stuff on it. All right. So now what we're ready to do is put these 2 together, and I'm just going to use my when I'm under the needle for sounds like my Botox injection, which I don't get, but I'm just going to hold at each of these junctures. I'm going to feel. Again, that's the tactile thing that I speak to you often about. You can feel when it's flat, and you can look to see that it's flat. But frankly, when you develop your tactile feel, you'll know without even looking. So we're going to put it under the needle and sew this, and I'll be back. Okay, so I've sewn my seam, and I'm going to again pop them so they'll be open. Do this also from the front. I call this my sewing meditation, as I typically go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so let's take a look and see what we have here for squaring this up. All right, this is my antler design folded corner clipper, and I think this is really pretty good. I might just be like a threads width off. Now you're going to want to line some stuff up to make sure you don't have anything weird. And really, I'm just going to be shaving off probably nothing that's even going to show up, just threads worth. But, you know, why not? Why not do that? Why not do that? What I like about this ruler is that it has 1/4 inch markings on the diagonal. And I think that every quilter should have 1/4 inch markings on the diagonal on a ruler that they have, and not the bastardized ones where, you know, they figured in the 1/2 inch for whatever your, you know, the trim down is. Just get a real ruler with real measurements, and you will find that you will use this a lot. And I'll pull it out when we do the flying geese. All right, so here we have our centerpiece for our our Sawtooth Star. Now the other thing that we need, and I have already cut these, are 3-inch cut squares that will go, I need 4 of those that will go in these corners. But now what we're going to do is make these flying geese units, and I'm going to show you how easy it is. But I'm also going to show you the care that you need to exercise so that you can get perfect units each time. To make this 4 at a time, no waste flying geese method, we're going to make 2 passes of placing and sewing. And this is white, let me, so you can see this a little bit better. We start with a large square that is determined based on the size of the flying geese unit that you want to make. We're making a 2.5 by 5 inch flying geese unit. And remember, flying geese units are by their nature twice as wide as they are high. Twice as wide as they are high. That's why they take up a footprint of 2 units on this 16 square grid. This is the goose. This is the sky. Although I've seen other people say it differently, so let me say it so that it doesn't matter. This will always be your large square, and these will be your smaller square. So however you wish to call it, I choose to call this goose and sky because I have to keep it simple or I will get confused. Now, you know I'm a glue baster, and I particularly like to glue baste when I'm working with units that have bias in them, which these do, and where I want distortion-free sewing. I'm distracted because I dropped a pin on the floor and I'm barefoot. So I was hoping I could, find it before it ends up in my foot. So anyway, what I like to do, and do it however you like. I'm just going to use this so that I don't get glue on I just put some dots of glue on this. And I'm going to place, just slightly nudged in, as Deb suggests, just a slight nudge. You just see a peak of the pink, the peak of the white. And you want your corners evenly on the diagonal. Now, another thing that you could do, and in fact, I might suggest it for you, is for you to maybe draw a diagonal so you're sure that your corners go through it. And another way to do that, before we set this, is, basically check it with a long enough ruler, not this one. We'll use Deb's ruler. Here you have, just line up the line so you're straight and you're at the edge. And then I choose to, this is my favorite marking pencil. I still don't have a friction pen. And be mindful that I come from either direction because I have this thing in the middle. But when you put your line down, you want to make sure you're going through the corners of these. And why is that? Well, it's because you're on an angle, and if you're out of kilter, remember, small problems on angles end up bigger problems over the course of what you're doing. Now, what I like to do is I use my Bernina gated foot. I extol the virtues of this all the time. What I like about it, we'll look at it from this area or vantage point. This foot, this gate extends beyond the foot. So I can see that really well when I'm sewing. And let me make a darker line for you. Okay, I made a darker line so that you can see better, but this is what I like about it. I can put my foot, that gate, which is extending in front of the foot, and I can see exactly where I am on this line. And I can sew very accurately and quickly with that. The other thing that I'd like to tell you is that using, and I'm happy with this, so I'm going to go ahead and take my steam off and go ahead and set the glue. Now, one reason I like to glue base, one of many, is that if you're making a ton of these, you can phase your production. So again, this is a two-step process. We have to put our corners on, sew, and then we have to cut, then we have to press, and then the next thing we're going to do for our second pass on these is put, initially this is what you have. And this is the second pass on each of these units, so that when you cut it yet again, this is that side and this is that side. So you can see that if you are sitting down and you're marking and doing the glue, it's not going to come loose. It's going to sit flat. And then when you go to your machine, you can chain piece the heck out of these things. So get the foot that you like, mark mark the way that you like, and then go ahead and go to town. And it makes it go by very quickly. So if you be like Henry Ford, do like things at the same time, because you are able to not stop your flow. And I'll show you some other opportunities to do that in our additional processing of this block. Okay, here we have my stitching on either side of the line. You can see that looks pretty straight. Doesn't look like a drunkard's path or anything like that. And I am going to go ahead and cut this. Line it up carefully. You can, if you can see your stitching line, that's always a good. Okay, so once you do this, you have what I call, I would call this the little foxes method of no waste flying geese, the no waste little foxes, because that's what we end up with after our first pass. We have little foxes, and it makes you want to put some eyes and a cute little nose on them. So the next thing that we're doing is very carefully, remember this is a bias edge that you have just done, so be careful that you're not stretching, so you're being very careful. And you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my pressing mat and I'm going to set it over top. My pressing mat makes sure that I don't get a shine. And I have a little perfectly pressed little fox in waiting. I actually find making flying geese oddly therapeutic. Of course, there's many things about quilting that are therapeutic. Kind of like to count to 5. Don't ask me why. Okay, so that's our first pass. Our second pass is really going to be similar. We're going to, you know, I have to do the glue. That's just really quite important to me. I'm going to use a ruler that I don't use for quilting because the glue does get on the ruler. So we're just going to do that straight on the diagonal. Again, you don't want to be outside of your seam line because glue basting works so well. In fact, I actually was quilting something and I realized that I had a Lemoyne star that was still just glued together. So what we're going to do is we're going to, again, just, you know, microns of peeking out of the white, and we want to make sure that we're directly straight. And if you have to check yourself, do that. Just, you know, put your ruler down and check that you're going, you know, straight through as I am. So that's good. And I'll give that a little press. So again, this is your second pass of your production. If you've got 200 of these to do, I promise you, if you do it this way, you will do it faster, because where you're saving time is at the machine. No one will beat you at the machine if you glue baste and mark. Now, I know a lot of people like to use lines on their machine bed, but frankly, for larger blocks, you can't do that because you can't see the other side of it. So it doesn't take a minute to do that, you know, and I think it increases your accuracy rather than doing it the other way. And I have done it the other way, and I'm just going to say it's an okay way. It seems like it's better. And I will tell you what is not a good way. I have seen people that I respect demonstrate, you know, marking the line by simply ironing and folding this. All right, by the time you fold it and iron it, why wouldn't you just take your ruler and a pencil and mark it? You're doing 5 times more work than and risking, you know, futzing around with your bias. And it's, you know, think about what you're trying to do. We're going to do it now because it really infuriates me. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go, oh, we'll do this cool method where we don't have to mark. I'm going to have to fold it. I'm going to go ahead and put a press in it. I'm going to unfold it. And then I've got this weird line and I may not be on it. Just take a damn ruler and mark it. You know, that's really all you have to do. Do not ask me why I am so invigorated by that. So let me go sew this for you. Okay, I chain pieced these, and you can see that it looks pretty darn straight. And we're going to go ahead and clip these and do our final press before we trim. Okay, again, if you line up your 1/4 inch mark on your seam line, it ought to be close to where you're supposed to be if you sewed it correctly. If it's not, you might want to take a look. And now our little foxes have become geese in all of their glory. This, got a little bit of sponge in this, and it's a hard surface, but not that hard of a surface. So let's move this out of the way. And now what we're going to do is, remember we set the seam already on the back, so that's the other time saving. Set the seam before you cut it. And now that's pressed open really nicely. I'm having withdrawal from my pressing sheet. Again, we're going to be really careful that we're not stretching this. It's bias. And this is where the bias wonk comes in. If you get all wonkified here, this edge does not become, it toes in, and you got to be careful. You know, what happens there, it gets kind of toed in or bowed out, whichever the case might be. So that's why you have to be so careful with it. And if you're not using oversized methods, then what happens is that if it's not perfect, you're just going to have gaps. I don't mean to go on and on yammering about it, but obviously I think it's important. And the time you spend here, and you know, once you develop all your muscle memory for doing this, the time that you spend doing what looks like futzing about, you don't have to spend, everything's going to line up perfectly because everything is perfectly aligned and perfectly squared. Okay, now what we're going to do, let me move my iron so I don't harm my little cutting mat here. This is not my regular cutting mat. Okay, now I'm going to show you how we cut these, and I'm going to come in a little bit closer for you. You might be tempted to not read the directions and make your first cut by lining up the top here, because you can easily see, oh yeah, it's 2.5. I'm going to line that up and do. No, you would be wrong. Don't do that. Our first cut is this way. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to look at this. Our trim size is 5.5 by 3. So I'm lining up this 5.5, and I've got this line here is going to go through my. So here's where you're going to know if you've done it right or not, because if the 5.5 isn't on the inside, and you can see that it is, but not by much because it's a no waste method, then you will be fine. And this looks really good to me. Now the other thing that I want to share with you is I'm only going to make the first 2 cuts here. Okay, now remember, I'm telling you my Henry Ford production tips. If you've got 200 of these and you stop and pick up your rule and realign and do this, you're wasting time, and your delicate, your beautiful delicate fingers and wrists and everything, and your eyes and your brain are going to have to work harder. Don't make them work harder. This is what we're going to do. We've made our cut. It goes up there. We're going to do the next one. Remember, my brain, I've already trained my brain in my eye. I know what's what. I can do this with my eyes closed, with half my normal coffee, because I know what I'm lining up, and I'm not having to pause and recalibrate my brain for a different cut. And of course, if you had I think this blade is okay. Let me try another one. It could be just that my board's a little spongy. And look at what our waist is very little here. You can see how inconsequential our waist is. All right, and here we go. Now, if any of these aren't right, I'm going to point it out to you. But so far, so good. And all that's inside. This is my Martelli's. I know this has a new blade in it. Okay, put it there. And here's our last one. You can do so many fun things with this. Karen Brown has a really good video if you want to do things with stripes and really how to orient stripes and stuff like that. Look for her Flying Geese video, so you have things that are, you know, going the right way. I see a lot of people demonstrate stuff, and they've got fabric that's directional, and they're the stuff is going all googly, and I try to avoid googly. This is a non-directional fabric, and it's a very faint print. Okay, now here's my pile of stuff. All right. That is one rotation, not 4 rotations. And now I know that I have a different calibration for my eye, which is I'm lining straight here, right? I'm lining straight down here and at the 5.5 and 3, and I'm double checking on my 2, and I can see a little peeking out. Okay, you want to get it to take those small calibrations so you can get it perfectly square. And there, I just have threads worth. But again, you see, this is a different batch processing, and we're lining up. We're looking at different things now. And we've reduced the handling of our fabric and our block because we're not rotating each one separately. We're rotating the whole pile. Do that too for your half square triangles, particularly if, and I'll do a video on this, if you keep them closed and trimmed using a triangle trimmer, and the cut line that you need on your, just put it on the seam line. You can see I got it. Let me just get this off. You're making half as many cuts, and you really don't have to do any rotation. But if you don't like doing it that way, then do the same thing that we have, that I'm showing you here. Do 2 of your cuts, line up, do 2 of your cuts, pile, 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 and then rotate your entire pile, and then work from, you know, the trimmed. Okay, guys, each one of these was perfect. And I will tell you, I made 200 of these, and I had one that was not perfect, and that was I think I fell asleep at the sewing machine. So what makes a perfect flying geese unit? A perfect flying geese unit has perfect balance in the corners, perfect distribution, just like with half square triangles, perfect distribution of the fabric. And you can tell that when the seam line goes straight through. Okay, so I'm talking about perfect distribution, but this one isn't quite perfect, is it? If it were perfect, it would be going straight over here. So I'm about 2 threads off. Am I worried about it? No. But this is how you tell that you're perfect, is when your seam line goes straight through to the corner. So this one does that. This one I must adjust. This one over here does. This one, not quite. But again, it's so unnoticeable. This one is mostly there. These actually look better on the front than I expected they would look on the back. And these you won't notice, but again, this is going through slightly to the left of the corner. That's exactly through the corner. And I will tell you where that is coming from. It's this, it's this lining up and how you do it. So, and you can see here it's just slightly off. But I promise you that isn't going to give you any problem. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at how our block is going to be fashioned. So let me get this out for you. Okay, one of the things you have to be careful of, maybe you never do it, but this is not the block we're looking for. It's a block that you can do, and in fact, it is a testament to all the really super cool things you can do with this block, this being one of them. But we're doing this. We're doing a star block, so we want these to be star points, right? So just take some care to make sure you're doing what you expect to be doing on there. And then the other thing that we're going to do is set our 3-inch squares there.